Da-dun, da-dun. How many of you are going away for reading week? Next week is reading week, by the way. For those of you who didn't know. I didn't think about it, actually. Any of you, besides Maddie, going away out of Edmonton? Yes? Where are you going, Isaiah?
Going back to Grand Prairie with my girlfriend.
Grand Prairie. Ah, that's going to be relaxing, I guess.
It's where she's going.
Ah, wait. That means you're going to be staying at her parents' family?
Yeah.
Ooh. Not to add any pressure or anything.
I thought it was good. I stayed there.
Right. I remember that. Anybody else? Anybody else is going to be here in Edmonton? Oh, man. Well, it's going to be good. Chill. Any plan of leisure? My plan? Yes, please. There is. Yeah. Really? We're like a White Avenue or something? All right. If you send it to me, I'll send it circulate on an e-class or a class message. That sounds good. Anything else? My plan is to play some game. To actually, I have one trial, one rating that I want to do. I wanted to do, like I studied it. I know what's happening and I haven't got a chunk of time. So I want to get into it, get yelled at and clear it. Anyway, so today we're going to keep going with the chapter 5. And I think some people started to take a little earlier, reading week, which is good for them. Anyway, we're going to finish. We're going to talk about chapter 5 and see how much we can go, and that's okay. We were talking about the origins of needs, and we were talking about physiological needs that are chemical imbalance related to our, hormone balance, chemical balance in the brain, whatnot. Today, we're going to talk about the psychological side of some of the basic needs. But a little bit of note that actually earlier psychologists, there were different approaches to go about needs. Earlier, psychologists tried to list everything, identify all the needs that we have psychologically. And they got really messy. Like, for example, Murray's work here. He identified many needs, and I'm listing, achievement, affiliation, aggression, autonomy, difference, difference, dominance, so on and so forth. And you may realize this is actually alphabetical order. So this keep going until, I don't know, probably nothing on a Z, but something close to Z really too. So that's a long list, over 100 needs. And also leisure scholars, social psychologists of leisure in an earlier time also try to do the same thing. But today what we're going to do is the opposite. We're going to try to look at some of the people and theory who try to nail down, okay, what are the foundational psychological needs? One of the first, well, actually most famous person who did that is this person, Abraham Lincoln, not Lincoln, sorry, Maslow, Abraham Maslow, psychologist. Some people he was the founder of what's called humanistic psychology, as opposed to abnormal psychology. He looked at something good about human psychology. So his hierarchy of needs, right? Have you seen this? Yeah, good. So he identified 5 needs, of which top 3 are more psychological in nature. The bottom is definitely physiological. The safety is also shelter need. And that's also quite a physiological as well. So the top 3 are more psychological in nature. And this rank order is about importance of the need. Higher, the more important, but more difficult for us to really achieve it, according to Maslow's theory. Okay, so the theory here in this pyramid, what's not evident, but what's implied here is that higher order needs should affect us, our decision, our emotions, our thinking more when the lower needs are met. It's not like they cannot overlap. It's not like, for example, we cannot worry about self-actualization when we don't have, quote unquote, love and belonging. It's not like that. not necessarily like rigid like that. But if your love and belonging is not met, probably your primary concern is around here rather than self-actualization. So you achieve, to an extent, you open up a one and you move to the next. You satisfy one and you move up to the next. Now, Maslow's hierarchy is one of those things that you see everywhere, not just psychology, but for example, human resources. If you ever study human resources, you're going to see Maslow's hierarchy in a textbook, pretty much. HR, human resources. And many practitioners, your future boss, your future colleagues, they love Maslow. Anything you talk about, anytime you talk about need, you're going to hear, oh, that's Maslow. Because it's a pyramid, it's need. There's a 5 thing, it's easy to understand, right? But your chapter says that actually, and chapter is quoting some of the most famous 21st social psychologists, Rich Ryan and Edward Deci. They think that evidence, the data to support Maslow's hierarchy of psychological needs is pretty weak. And it's actually fact. If you talk to psychologists, this is pretty much agreed upon. The catch is that a lot of people, practitioners, just still love it because it's simple, it's easy to understand, it's everywhere. Some of the issues are listed here, and we're going to go deeper into the issues on the next slide. So just don't worry about too much. But if you think about it, the top 3 psychological concepts here, needs here, have quite a bit of conceptual issues, like belonging, self-esteem, self-actualization. You can see the connection between them. You belong to some group, for example, right? You belong to some group. Don't you feel you have self-esteem more? Your self-esteem is elevated. You belong to diversity that help oftentimes your, self-esteem. And that maybe diversity also help you with the self-actualization, doesn't it? To an extent, depending on how good you are, right? So there's quite a bit of overlap, and that conceptual boundary issue. The boundaries are not clear. The second point is about multiple exceptions to the proposed ordering, and we're going to talk about that on the next slide. So for the criticism of the Maslow, understand this one, so that you're not going to be one of those person when you hear the concept, the word need, you're all over Maslow. Please, you can know Maslow, but please be the person. You know what? But Maslow has some issues. Here's the why. The first issue, Flatar and Said summarized. First issue was called a deprivation and dominance. And that's assumption in the Maslow's hierarchy. Basically, unsatisfied need should become important. So in that 5 stages, 5 level, if, for example, you are not satisfied with your self-esteem, that should be more important. That should be dominating your behavior. That should be dominating your thinking, so on and so forth. But that necessarily isn't supported by the data as well. So that's related to the ordering issue. Even the self-esteem is the issue, people are still quite a bit concerned about physiological issue. People are still concerned about safety issue, belonging and love. They're constantly operating quite a bit. But that shouldn't be it if the pyramid hierarchy is correct. The second point here is also about the ordering issue. It's called gratification and activation. So what that means is basically what just I talked about a minute ago. If you satisfy one need, if you kind of clear one stage, you should be moving on to the next need, the next stage. That should be the primary concern, but also that doesn't necessarily happen based on the studies. And the last one is an interesting one. They found that there's actually quite a bit of a conceptual problem around the self-actualization, how Maslow conceptualized self-actualization. We think self-actualization is something that we can do, like normal people. I mean, maybe some of you are maybe exceptionally talented in certain areas. I believe that, like a normal person like me. Yeah, I mean, I get self-actualization a little bit in, I don't know, in my work, my leisure, gaming, badminton, whatever, just a little bit, right? To an extent, I feel okay about it. But Maslow thought about self-actualization a little differently. Probably not something that's for someone like me. He read biographies of quote unquote world leaders like Abraham Lincoln's, Mahatma Gandhi, those people's books and whatnot, stories. And then he conceptualized self-actualization. What self-actualization meant for him, Maslow, was very different probably from what we conceptualize, how we conceptualize self-actualization. When he was quote unquote, well, he was writing a book, actually, he was sort of interviewed too, about this top of the pyramid, self-actualization. How much a percent in North America, well, actually it was US context, do you think, well, for normal people in the US, maybe Canada too, to what degree they can satisfy self-actualization? That was the question. And Maslow said, it's not based on the data or anything, but top of his head, he would say, speculate about 10%. He can, normal people can, out of 1 to 10, people should be around 1. That's how he conceptualized self-actualization. Average people would be around that. That's very low. If you actually measure, there are many measurements, scales into, survey questions of self-actualization. If you do that, that's not what you get. You get actually over 50%, or even closer to 7, quite easily for normal people like ourselves. So he had a very elitist, all of that to say he had a very quote unquote elitist view of self-actualization. So what he meant by self-actualization isn't really applicable. We're not gonna establish a new country. Let's be honest, probably not, odds are. Or we're not gonna solve an entire war, probably not, right? But that's what he meant. And also the last point about the cultural relevance. The self-actualization has this issue and focus on self, your individual, that you achieving the best in yourself, right? But psychologists who looked at the different cultures came to Maslow saying, well, why that's always the top of the hierarchy? Why it's that's the most important thing? Because in some cultures, like some of the Asian cultures, African cultures, some of the Eastern European cultures too, it's more about family, community, thriving, and being well, rather than you being awesome, you being the best you can do. So its relevance to different culture has been questioned. Now, that being said, the most probably relevant part of the Maslow's hierarchy today to the social psychology of leisure and psychology is the self-actualization part. That's where a lot of research happening. But what we mean today is very different from Maslow's idea, right? It's not one of those elitist view of self-actualization. It relates to concept we already learned, something like a flow or serious leisure. You remember serious leisure? One of the personal rewards we talked about is self-actualization. Don't you feel that way? I don't know, it could be some sports, it could be workout. When you get serious, will you recognize in your community, right? Music, dance, arts, anything. You feel that you're self-actualizing, that you're becoming the better version of yourself. You have more skills, which relates back to the flow. Flow is all about matching the challenge and the skill. So if you pursue more flow, you automatically gain more skill because you gain more skill, you need a more challenging situation, and then you need more skill, so on and so forth. So basically, your skill level goes up. It could lead to self-actualization as well. So there's a lot of conceptual relationship here too. Now, Maslow identified 5, and there's a lot of problem with it. So some of the psychologists, like for example, Roy Baumeister, who is probably one of the most famous 20th social psychologists too. He went in, reviewed all the research about base psychological needs, and he tried to find what is called basic psychological needs, as in one of the fundamental psychological needs. And he came up with actually 10 criteria, I think, and I kind of consolidated here into 8. The chapter listed as 6 or so, but it just expanded a little bit. The first is what we call the basic need, fundamental psychological needs, should cause goal-oriented behaviors to satisfy them. It affects our thinking, okay? So we want to meet, let's say self-actualization is one of them. So we will make a daily planning, daily behavior choice. What to do? Are you going to come to the class today or not? Your self-actualization need would impact your need. If you think that yes, coming to the class would, relates to help you satisfy self-actualization, probably you will come. That's goal-directed behavior. That need becomes your goal, basically, day to day. The second is cognitive processing, which relates to what we just talked about. It basically occupies your thinking, right? If the love and belonging is, let's say, basic need, then our thinking will be around love and belonging. Do we? How's our thinking? Your day-to-day thought, day-to-day conversation. Do we talk about belonging? Do we talk about love? Do you? I think it's one of those age group stuff. You're going to see a lot of like your friends post on a social media, like a Facebook, around 20, I think 24 or 5 first wave of like people getting married and getting baby, and then 28 or something like that, and you have another one, and then 32 or something. You get the waves of those things, and you're like, oh my God, if you're a single person and you feel like, oh my God, what am I doing? You're fine. You're not missing around. It's good though. I'm not anti-relationship. It's all good too. Anyway, third one. If for the need to be basic, quote unquote, basic and fundamental, it should have a positive consequences, positive effect on our emotion, like happiness. When we meet that need, when we meet the need of, let's say love is fundamental and basic, we should feel happy. That makes sense, right? And the opposite is the force. If you don't satisfy them, there's going to be detrimental issue. Fifth, they should have long-term psychological effect. It's not just emotional, transient, temporary impact, but also keep meeting those needs that say love and belonging should help you. If they're basic and fundamental, they should help us developing into a more, let's say, wholesome human being. It should, psychologically speaking, if it's a universal fundamental need. Maybe it makes sense in terms of love and belonging. We don't have to have a, romantic relationship, but some love and belonging can be very important, right? We can agree on that. And they're not subsumed under any needs, so they're fundamental. They're not subcategory of something else. They stand on its own. And seventh, they influence a variety of behaviors across a different situation. It's not situation specific. If the need is only about, for example, leisure context, that cannot be called basic need. And that's led to one of those very famous theory called a basic psychological needs theory, which has been used in a leisure, recreation, sports, and tourism context as well. And it's part of the bigger theory called a self-determination theory. You may know that. And we define all those basic needs already at the beginning of chapter 4, if you remember, as part of the immediate conscious experience. We good? So I'm not going to talk about it. I think you heard that in RLS 100 as well. The one thing tricky and very important is the autonomy. Okay, in the chapter 4, I differentiated autonomy from the chapter. The textbook had listed autonomy in relation next to actually freedom, but I differentiated them. They're quite a different things. So autonomy is more about self-endorsing behavior and being in line with your true interests and values rather than independently choosing something. Now, here are some differences, a little more details, that distinguish actually these basic psychological needs from this one, from physiological needs. What the first point here means, that these psychological needs, basic needs, are growth needs, is that, remember we talked about hunger, and my wife got a little unhappy when she was left hungry in the first night in New Orleans, and I started to order beers and started to talk about the menu, and she was like, I'm ready to eat. Sweetie, I'm ready to eat, That was my wrong. my bad. Anyway, so she's not always like that. Just for her, in her defense, she's not always like, she's always chill. But that hunger need, when it's unsatisfied, it becomes dominant, right? It started to affect our emotions, our thinking, our behavior, so on and so forth. But these guys over here, so that's, we can say deprivation-based need. So when it's unsatisfied, it becomes very, very powerful. These guys are always constantly operating, should be, theoretically. Like, for example, autonomy. It's not like when we meet, let's say, in terms of hunger, we eat too much, we eat very much, I don't want to even see your food, right? So it becomes really less relevant and less salient. But in terms of autonomy, it's not like that. It's not like I got enough autonomy, so I don't want autonomy anymore. Not necessarily. It's not like, oh, I felt enough competence in, I don't know, in your workout or in your sports, so I don't need a competence in your academics or anything. It's not like that, right? You'd rather have competence always, in many cases, in almost all cases. So that's what we mean by growth need. It's always affecting, it's always a good thing to an extent. The second point was very bold hypothesis that this theory has, that these three basic psychological needs are universal, apply to all human beings. And they mean by it, all human beings, across, for example, different cultures. However, they have a little bit of caveat that ordering which one of those three things, autonomy, competence, and belonging, might be most important or more important, may depending on a culture. Maybe in the US, autonomy is more important, a little more individualistic. Maybe in Japan, interpersonal relatedness may be more important, so on and so forth. And the last one, autonomy. That being said, autonomy, according to their theory, is most important. Why? Because autonomy is literally always important, always relevant. Compared to something like, for example, competence. Think about it. There are some behavior we don't really give a what's up about competence, like watching TV. Do you want to feel competent? What do we mean by feeling competent while watching TV to begin, right? Maybe in some situation, maybe you're watching some documentary based on a science, or I don't know, some movie that is based on a quantum physics theory, so you feel competent, maybe. But most cases, watching TV, competence isn't probably relevant. Or going solo activity, doing solo activity, relatedness may not be so relevant, but autonomy, according to this theory, is always relevant, therefore always important. Now, there have been a few conceptual advancements in the theory, so I want you to get that. I want to discuss that, how that impact our practice, day-to-day practice in our leisure, recreation, sports, park, tourism industry. The first being this issue around autonomy, how they have been revised, if you will, the idea of the autonomy. Before, autonomy was conceptualized as independent choice. That, for example, Connor, you have three options and you get to choose one of them independently, independent of Holden, independent of anybody else. That was autonomy. But we realized, well, first of all, some of the people from different cultural perspective came in to say, well, that's not always, some people want. And maybe we can agree, Canadian too, right? Don't you think? Or maybe you're not Canadian, or whoever you are. Do you always want to choose stuff? Seriously. Have you ever had a situation where you're like, can you please just choose it for me? Yes, 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 thank you. Any situation like that? I want to ask, actually, talk to yourself. Any situation you felt like, I don't want to choose. I don't want to ask someone else to choose. Who was it? When was it? What was the situation? We thought that a choice was so important, so fundamental, one of the most important things psychologically to us. And some people criticize that. Tell me, when you felt like you don't want to choose? Talk to yourself. Talk to me.
Like when you're going to a restaurant.
When you're going to a restaurant. Oh my God, restaurant with like over 100 menus. Have you been those things? Especially Chinese restaurant. I don't want to be like, my wife is gonna go crazy if I say that, but I've been to a Chinese restaurant with 100 menus. I'm like, there's no possible way that I can choose. Okay, that's a good one. Yeah. So when did you not want to choose?
I think if I just want to hang out,
Mm.
but I don't have the exact points.
Hang out with whom? Like what kind of people?
Friends, maybe.
Friends?
Okay, just chill.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then,
You want them to choose?
yeah.
Ah,
But don't have any idea.
makes sense. Makes sense. Anytime when you didn't feel like you want to choose. Huh?
I think restaurants easy one.
Restaurant, yes. Anything else? Restaurant.
Yeah.
What game to play?
It's like, I don't know. What I like playing with friends.
Because you bought all the free games every month on your, PS5, so you have so many of them. What am I gonna play?
Yeah. I'll let my friends pick. Like, very picky sometimes.
Huh?
Movie, yeah.
What movie to watch? What TV to watch? Have you had in a relationship where you're like, let's do movie night? Okay, sweetie, what movie? What? Just choose one. And then the other person goes like, well, you choose one this time.
Yeah.
And then that morphs into a fight. I thought it was gonna be a fun night, right? Noah, anytime when you felt you don't want to choose,
Yeah, for sure.
movie for sure. Uh-huh.
It's like that.
Yeah, you run out of ideas after so many times, right?
Yeah, it's like
I'm gonna show up, we're gonna watch, but I don't want to.
you guys.
Sounds good. Sounds good. All right, so I heard some ideas. Movie night. I think this is a classic if you ever been to, especially in a like family or relationship context. Me and my wife might have had a fight over that. Like, you choose. No, you choose. Why I'm the one who is choosing all the time. Well, I'm choosing that too. Okay, so that's enough. But anything else? Yes. There we go. Wait, you said online game?
Yeah.
We're just talking about that too. Right. It's like, what are we gonna do? We're on a Discord. Like, what are we gonna do? Can we just pick a game so we can play? The problem with those free games every month, comes from like, PS5, PlayStations, and stuff like that. You download those stuff, and you have like over 100 games. Like, what are we gonna play? And some people, when you say, let's play this Among Us, then some people are like, I don't want to play Among Us, and like, then you choose. Classic. Anything else?
It's even like a vacation, just book like a tour.
Oh.
Have to decide where you're going, just go along for the night.
I had a very, very poor travel. If you're going away this next week, be careful. I had a close situation with my wife in New Orleans, too. Like, apparently one of the last day, I was the one who was supposed to be thinking about the trip, and I didn't think about any activity. So I'm like, let me ask Google. Anyway, that was okay, but that happened too. So autonomy as independent choice, you can see that it's actually, even in Canada, even in our life, is problematic. Not always that important. And in other culture, more so, because, well, let me skip this here. Sometimes we want to actually give up our freedom and choice and let especially important other people choose. Like Yang and I were talking about sometimes hanging out with the friends, and we'd rather want them to choose sometimes. Well, sometimes I don't know what to do, right? So we want other people to choose. Sometimes though, you have those important people like your children, your family members, friends you haven't seen so long or something like that. You really care that they choose what they want rather than you choose what you want. Make sense? So your choice here is to actually give up your choice. Does that make sense? It's kind of a little philosophical. You're choosing not to choose and let them choose. And that's meaningful. That's important in some situations in the culture. So we revised the idea of autonomy, like we talked about briefly in chapter 4, that it's no longer independent choice, that you are choosing whatever you want out of 3 options, 4 options, whatever. but it's more about being quote unquote one with the behavior, one with the activity. That you value that behavior, whether it was chosen by you or by somebody else. That you, like my wife may say, sweetie, we're gonna watch this movie tonight. Let's watch this movie. I may not so care about the movie per se, to be honest, but I value, for example, of the idea of spending time with my wife. As long as you do that, actually, you can still feel autonomous, like being one. Auto means one, right? Being one with the behavior. You don't think while doing the activity, oh my God, I wish I was playing game. You're not doing that. You're actually in that activity. You're in that behavior. Make sense? Now, related to autonomy is this idea. It was actually a big conundrum before because we knew something about autonomy that was important, whether it's the self-endorsement or the previously it was independent choice, but anyway, self-endorsement. But then we also knew in many situations, like a parenting, teaching, coaching, like sports, people who love sports, right? We knew that structure is important for people's experience and behaviors and well-being. Does that make sense? Structure here means, let's say, explaining what's going to happen, right? And your coach, you're going to have today's session practice. You're going to explain it. You're going to set an expectation. Like you're going to show up on time. You're going to do this. Once you show up, we're going to do these things. You know, there's some expectation, right? But doing so is typically, there's some element of not authoritarian, but it's like there's someone in the power. Somebody's kind of deciding, you know, giving a message that this is how it's going to go, right? It's a structure. That's what we call structure. But then when we were conceptualized autonomy as independent choice, that was directly against it. If you have a structure in your sports program, think about the coach, think about the teacher, high school teacher who had a structure, discipline, so on and so forth. That meant basically you don't get to choose so many things, right? That was directly opposite. So why? We knew that a structure, a certain level, not too much, right? Not like micromanaging every second of whatever the sports practice session, but some level of structure is very important. But then autonomy is important. So they're like, how come? But they're directly opposite. How can we achieve both? Well, that's where basically autonomy, that's why also autonomy was revised. It's not about independent choice. It's more about with a good coach, they give you structure, they give you expectation, but they tell you why. So that you feel like, you know what, that's important. I'm going to show up on time. You don't feel like you're forced to show up. You feel like, well, that's important. I value that too. I value being on time. Siri. Yeah. Yeah. Have you heard what the series said? We good? Jordan, we good? Did you hear from all the way? Siri was saying that she teaches sometimes dance too. So she would give this almost like a structured choice. It's a choice, but it's not like, hey, today, what are we gonna do? What dance do you want to do? That's too open-ended. The students will be like, what do you mean? Like, you're the teacher. Please tell us to an extent. But Siri would go, okay, is it you want to slow slow dance or more of a up-tempo, upbeat kind of faster dance, so that you have nicely structured two choice. So there's a choice, and you get to do probably what you value more, but at the same time, it's structured enough that you don't feel like you're all over. You don't know what to do, and that's exactly what happened in the teaching context. So we knew this was important, but we couldn't really explain when we were defining autonomy as independent choice. Now, we came up with this model, well, not we, some other researcher, educational researcher, actually. So what's important is here, need support and need thwarting. Need support means basically we can create as a teacher, as a parent, as a coach. You may become a parent in the future. You may not. To help your athletes, your clients, your children, your family members, whatever, their need satisfaction. on the right side, on the right side. And that's what I wrote it up here too. On the left side, you're actually actively not helping them. Not helping their behavior, need satisfaction, not helping their well-being. They're not doing well, they're not feeling well, they're not happy. So here you see the word chaos, which is opposite to basically structure. That's what Serial is talking about to an extent. If we just give too much of an open-ended question, we can do whatever. What do you want to do? That's chaos. Now today, we're going to focus on this structure side and this side. And this was breakthrough that we realized this structure, giving structure is actually helping need satisfaction, increasing autonomy too. Some of the strategy, exact strategy we can help with the structure is, for example, providing assistance, helping them. Actually, if it's a dance, just go to them, maybe show the choreography, which I can't do, but I can't dance. If it's workout, you go there, okay, so you're doing something wrong. Do you need help? Okay, you need help. Let me show you, this is how you do whatever they, training. When needed is a key though. You don't want to be that person that over-parenting, always monitoring, always micromanaging, so on and so forth. Scaffolding is about starting with this easier one, building up. It's also structure. People actually arguably have less choice, quote unquote, but actually it helps their need satisfaction. We know it now. It's because it's a structure. Learning from mistake is another one. Clarifying, and that's over here. Communicating what is expected. You're going to show up, in this camp, you have to show up on time, and this is why. And as long as you explain it clearly in a way that's understandable and relatable, people go like, you know what? I get it. I'll do it. And that's good. Showing an overview, what's going to happen today, what's going to happen in today's session, so on and so forth, and monitoring progress, not in a micromanaging way, but periodically. That's why in some courses, we have this periodic, not just a final exam, boom. We have more of a breakdown of the smaller assignments so that we check in. Are you doing well? Like, are you learning things? This is where I want to actually here. Need frustration was another new concept added to this basic psychological needs theory. And this is an interesting one. Need frustration or thwarting, same thing. You can use either way. They are different from lack of satisfaction. Lack of satisfaction, let's say lack of competence, right? Lack of competence, need. Would it be you, with all the despite support and everything you have, and you make efforts to whatever the activity, you're not that quite good. That was me in basketball. I tried hard, junior high and high school. I was okay. I was like a six-man, the six-man idea of six-man. You're not the starting member, but you're the next person, and so on and so forth. I was always that, and I was fine. I was just that much good, right? So that's a lack of competence, dissatisfaction of competence need. Now, thwarting or frustration is something out there, whether it's a socially or environmentally, physically sometimes. It's actively preventing you from satisfying your competence. For example, having an overly critical coach that will just talk about what's wrong with you. Although you're definitely clearly doing something right too. They don't recognize that at all. They always talk about what's wrong with you. So it actively undermines your sense of competence. Make sense? What was your experience of need thwarting, whether it's autonomy, competence, or relatedness? I want to hear. Maybe you can even think about the pandemic situation too. Maybe pandemic was a lifetime where you felt maybe not leisure, maybe it could be leisure, it could be not leisure domain like academics and learning. It could be anything. Where did you felt ever that your need, basic need, autonomy, competence, or relatedness was actively prevented? You couldn't pursue it because of someone or something in your life. I will let you think. If you want to talk, You can talk, but you can think. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. No, on your back.
Oh,
So, when did you feel your need was frustrating?
high school.
High school. Why?
Probably basketball. I would say my grade 12 year, there's just a lot of like expectation
Ah.
from my coaches. That it wasn't like, it's not that, it made me play, made me play better, but it was never like satisfied.
The coach was very overly demanding. Yeah, hard on you.
Just
Demand. Maybe unrealistically high expectation too. Yeah, but he doesn't show how to get there, but he talk about where you should be more of, or okay. I hear you. No, I hear you. I was university myself once upon a time too. I hear you. What do you think, Hope? When did you feel your need was frustrated? We have to talk about basic psychological needs. So either it has to be autonomy, competence, or relatedness. Internet. How so? Social media. In relation to which need? Competence? Competence. Kind of related to though. Social media could be a good one though. How does that help you? How does actually not help your let's say relatedness? You feel connected or not connected? Actually, you feel like you cannot connect with other people because of that. Not helpful. Yeah. You can talk. You're talking to me. You're talking to people. Newer generation. Now, Maddie is talking about newer generation. How old are you? No, just kidding. I know, like I've seen like a kid from 3-year-old who just had iPad in front of them growing up. Literally, they know how to open up a parent's passwords and open up a YouTube and search it, but they don't know how to ask, for example, the direction on the street, for example, in random people. So I've seen that. All right. So when did you feel your need was frustrated? So many examples. Siri, what's up? It's done. So again, that's fine.
I played dance, like competitive dance.
Yeah.
Because my coach or like instructor was like very competitive.
Yeah.
And like everyone was on it, and I'm like, I like to dance. Like I know we need to be clean, but like she was like, we need to be clean all the time. And I'm like,
Okay.
it's not fun.
So her dance coach instructor was like very demanding, perfectionistic almost, that you have to be very competitive, that you have to be, the member have to be on the point. Perfect move from day one. I thought we were here to practice and enjoy a little bit too. No. That kind of coach can be actually frustrating competence need as well. And many other things too, probably autonomy too, probably. You feel like you're not dancing because you love dancing anymore. You're there because to satisfy somehow the instructor's expectation. Anything else? Isaiah.
My first year of high school, I made the basketball team.
Yeah.
My stepmom did not agree, so I had to do. So it's kind of like 50-50, but I didn't end up actually like.
So it was your family member, parent, who said, no, you cannot do this. That's a classic example. It happens. Probably happened to your life too. And I hope that we're not going to be the one who does this, because we're going to talk about it. It has a very, very severe consequence to human being and behaviors and well-being. How many of you loved online learning during the pandemic? Loved. Well, okay, so that was confusing because Krista is like, I thought it was this, but some of you loved. Some of you loved. Okay, that's great. There you go. It's flexible. Maybe you liked it. How many of you hated it? To be honest, after like 3 semesters, you didn't like it. Some of you didn't. But it's other people like you see like, yeah, there's a pros and cons, right? Probably good and bad. So that's also a need frustration sometimes too, that you feel like your, for example, autonomy or competence and relatedness in your academic life is actually frustrated by the technology when your e-class crashes on the midterm time for like a 5th time. Like, goddamn university chancellor, get that thing right, because this is like not a first time. This is like a 3rd semester of the online teaching, right? That actually frustrates our needs, seriously. So you see, it could be stuff, it could be thing, it could be person who frustrate our need. Now, that has a dire consequences. For example, well, the easiest one, it undermines your motivation, right? It did. Siri, your case too. Well, Isaiah, your case directly went to disengagement. You had to quit. And ill-being, we literally actually show psychological and also even physiological symptoms when the need frustration is so severe. Your stomach hurts, your head hurts, actually. It happens. It also leads to what's called a compensatory behavior. Have you seen some of the people who have what's called rigid behavior patterns? The person who has to do the same thing in the same way no matter what. Like, for example, maybe an athlete who runs 2 hours outside for kind of, practice sake, no matter what, whether outside is minus 20, 30 degrees, doesn't matter. You know why? That could be some of the like other reasons, but one reason can be need frustration, leading to what we call contingent self-worth, that you're only worthy as a human being or an athlete, for example, in this context, if only you keep doing certain things. That typically, that behavior gets quote unquote approval from your coach, teammate, or your parents. Your parents approve if you study homework 2 hours. Then you ended up developing this behavior that you do homework, sit on the desk 2 hours, no matter what. It also creates what's called oppositional defiance, and especially when the autonomy is frustrating. What that means is like, it's a typical adolescent kind of thing, that you choose something because other people told you to choose something else. Does that make sense? Your parents told you you should choose a basketball. What you care about is not choosing basketball and choosing anything else at all. That's what's the oppositional defiance. You're choosing something for the sake of just going against that person or something that's controlling you, trying to control you. And that's not good, because that makes you not autonomous with the behavior, right? You don't value that behavior. It's from the very beginning. You just want to go against your parents or whatever. And then that leads to also what's called a need substitutions, which is a situation where we started to endorsing extrinsic goals like being famous, making money, that kind of thing. Have you seen these problems? Anybody? It doesn't have to be you. It doesn't have to be your friends, but generally, maybe celebrity that you know. The people who only, for example, seems to care about making money or being famous. Maybe you see that in some of the influencers. Some of the influencers good. Seems to be the person I want to be friends with. But some people, no thank you. And we conducted one of the first study actually in a need frustration in leisure context. We have some studies in actually sports and gaming. It's an interesting example. Sports and gaming need frustration very much, but not so much in a leisure in general. And we did it with the Chinese international students. Bless you. What we found was that need satisfaction, satisfying them, and frustrating them, they're two different mechanisms. We can actually statistically differentiate them. That means, though, as a practitioners, helping people's satisfaction with the need doesn't mean helping them avoid need frustration. You could be doing this, need satisfaction, but you could be committing this. You could be creating a facility program where this happens, frustration happens. So we have to be careful. We have to watch out for both. And the need frustration in leisure predicted people's mental health problem as well. If you're more frustrated with your needs in leisure, you're more likely to develop anxiety, depression, so on and so forth. And that ain't be good. Sorry, the last one, because it's related to need frustration. And that leads to very interesting hypothesis. When your need is frustrated, it sits both frustrated and dissatisfied, but especially when they're frustrated, we overuse an activity that satisfies our basic needs at high level of immediacy, like quick and for sure, easy access, and predictable, consistent, always, 9 out of 10 times maybe, and density, dense, as in like not just one of the 3 needs, but 3 all needs. And research connected that to something like, for example, computer games. Have you thought about it? When your maybe competence need is frustrated, game is where you can get that quick competence. The game says you like, you're awesome, 95 out of 100. And gives you autonomy too, maybe to an extent. It gives you maybe relatedness, depending on the type of game, so on and so forth. The sum of the behaviors are, speaking of basic psychological needs, like a quote unquote, I don't want to say, well, it's a kind of weird metaphor, like kind of like a junk food. Computer game can be good. I enjoy it, to be honest. Like I love it too. But sometimes when it's misused, it can be quote unquote basic need junk food in a way that it's a quick and easy, it's a quick calorie, it gets you going. It satisfies all the stuff that you want, the saltiness, the greasiness, and all that kind of things that you want. But that may not be sustainable in long term. So that's what the need density hypothesis is. And if you have one of those, if your family has one of those, we may have to watch out. That could be because of frustration as well. Thank you. I'm gonna see you Friday if you're not leaving earlier for your trip. But I know everybody except the Maddie and who else was it? Is gonna stay in Edmonton. So I know you're gonna be here. Just kidding. Bye. Bye, Kenley. What's up?
Touch today's class.
Okay. Send me email and tell me why, and we'll send you access. Oh, no. Last class, the recording is already public.
Class.
This class. Okay, send me. Yeah.